What's going on, guys? It's Juice Audio, and today I'm reviewing the KSD C55 reference studio monitors. There's something really special about these, and of course, I've mentioned in my other videos that I really love the coax design or the coincident design, and they really nailed this design differently than a lot of other manufacturers. So we'll talk about that today. Let's get started. All right, so let's get started. So these are the KSD A55, and these have dual 5.5-inch woofers. But these are not actually labeled a 3-way. They're more of a 2.5-way. So what that means is that both of these drivers are playing bass. They're still crossed over a little differently, which I'll explain in a second. But instead of having a separate woofer, only mids and then tweeters, the way these work is that it's going to be bass and mids and tweeters. These have some of the most clear, like mid-range and upper range I've heard at a lot of speakers. So this company claims to use some Furtec filters that allow these drivers to play at a perfect phase to your ears. At first, I was a little fishy. I was like, all right, a lot of manufacturers say the same thing, ATC, everybody says that, right? But when I'm listening to these, like the resolution on these is another level, like, to be honest. I didn't hear it that much on the A200s because, the drivers are separated. But with these, having them almost as a point source, like everything is so clear. I've heard a lot of speakers and tested a lot of monitors in this studio. And like I mentioned in the intro, I always prefer the coax design with the tweeter in the middle of the woofer. Some people call it coax, some people call it coincident. What that does is align the tweeter with the woofer and has the phase accurate before any DSP or any time delay, right? So talking about the bass, these are 5.5-inch woofers. I believe they're made out of some carbon composite or weave. And these are dual ported, so they're ported at the back. Something special about this woofer is that I do not hear any of the port noise or the character of a port. It's almost like it's a sealed woofer, but you still feel the bass. You know how with sealed woofers, it's almost like you hear the sound, but you don't feel it, which is fine because those are incredibly tight. But they've managed to pull off having these being felt and heard at the same time. So it's really, really tight bass. And the ports on the back are very thin, so I feel like they've poured it only just enough to get some more extension without overdoing it. So the bass is incredibly tight. When you're mixing kicks, when you're mixing 808s, everything is crazy tight. And I really love how in such a small package, you have like a full range sound. Like when I first put these up, I was expecting these to roll off early. And these play down to 35 hertz on paper. You might say, oh, these are not a full range speaker. But when you listen to these, it's almost as if you're hearing like an 8-inch woofer that is really tight and has good quality to it because both of these drivers are playing bass. So having the lows mostly dedicated to this woofer and then around 150 move up to here, I could be mistaken on that number. The bass happens to be like very warm is the way I can describe it. Having two smaller drivers that can play faster than a large driver has its own texture and character to it. And I really like how these sound. So moving on to the mids, I guess you can say upper bass, mids, and highs. The mids are incredibly clear. So that's one thing I was baffled by. This driver moves in a lot. I'll put in the B-roll right here. This driver is moving a lot. And I would expect that to break up the mid-range and break up the high end. But it seems like with their phase technology, all of that is so cohesive. It's almost as if what you hear through these speakers is only through here. That's what it sounds like. You hear bass, you hear toms, everything through this top area. Like you don't even recognize that this is playing. Now moving on to the tweeter. I don't know why, but the sound signature of these versus the A200s, which are a very large speaker compared to these sound completely different. And it's something in the high end that I really like. Right off the rip, no tuning needed. I ended up not tuning these at all in my studio, which is pretty crazy. The high end was super fast and resolute. It's almost like on every song I put it through, you can sit here and listen all day long and mix all day long with no fatigue, but yet it extends super far past the point of human hearing. So the versions I have here are cherry. You can also buy these in all white. And it's the same type of design as the A200s with the metal shell on the outside, which is very rigid, the wood grain on front. And these speakers can be played upright or they can be played on their sides. This logo here will twist. So talking about mixing and translation, the first thing I noticed on these speakers is that they're very tight and they work perfect in the near field position. They play loud, but I would say you don't want to push them too loud because they're a small driver. They're not going to have a lot of excursion. So these play down to 35 hertz. I personally did not need to have a subwoofer while listening to these. I've tried them with the sub and without, mixing with both, and I prefer them without it because it's just such a tight sound in the lower end and the upper mids, the mids and the high end. They work together perfectly on the speaker. So while mixing, I found EQing and sweeping like very easy to pick up on what sounds bad and what sounds good, because these speakers are very flat, and somehow in my room they're still flat. And while mixing, I always do work in the mid-range first. I don't know about anybody else here, but I am a die-hard fan of the Aventone mix cubes. These have a similar mid-range, well, where it's tight, it's honest. If something's honky, it tells you right away, and you can easily clean up those parts of your mix that are muddy in the low mid-range, especially in the low mid-range and in the upper mids and throughout the whole mid-range. So the translation on these is great. I've took a couple of mixes through these, tested them out in the car, and they sound great. Love them. So these monitors are $2,049 each, or $4,100 a pair. And I honestly am a huge fan of these monitors and of KSD and what they're doing and bringing all these new speakers to the American market with their new technologies. And built into these monitors through their DSP is 6 bands of EQ, but the only way to access that is through the KSD remote. This remote is going to run you $1,000 USD, which is pretty expensive, but it's well built and functional. And I would have to say, if you're buying these monitors, I would end up buying the remote too, to tap into the resources that these have with EQ and have no latency doing it. I will say the one fault with this remote setup is that if you have a subwoofer, you're out of luck, because these tap in directly to your monitors and turn the monitors up and down. And what that is going to do is bypass your subwoofer. So if you're looking to buy a subwoofer with these, you'd probably end up having to get a KSD set or have a different monitor setup without this controller. And that was the only fault I found to have with this controller. It can only access these monitors digitally and not through analog. And that's all for today's video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed, and subscribe. Cheers.